Welcome back to Life Vision Lab, the space where strategy meets soul and science meets spirit. I'm your host, Shwetha, and before we dive into today's incredible conversation on episode 4, I want to start with a moment of deep gratitude. We've now crossed over 300 podcast downloads, and our community keeps expanding. With more than 1,400 beautiful souls on Instagram and 1,200 subscribers on YouTube. Tuning in for these heart-opening conversations, and honestly, I am in awe. Every single guest who's agreed to sit down with me feels like divine intervention. Perfectly timed, perfectly aligned. So to everyone listening right now, thank you. You're part of this ripple of clarity and consciousness that's spreading across the world. All right, so let's take a deep breath and let's dive in. Today's guest embodies that union of worlds so beautifully. Dr. Rosa Hope is an astrophysicist, award-winning scientist, spiritual mentor, and performing artist whose life reminds us that curiosity itself can be sacred. Since a very young age, Rosa has nurtured deep interest in art, science, and spirit. Asking the biggest questions and seeking answers across the world, she's earned 4 college degrees. Hell, I just barely did one, including a PhD in astrophysics, authored 14 scientific papers, and received over a dozen national and institutional research awards. Holy moly. Before she ever stepped into a lab, she traveled the globe from the UK to South Korea, then spent 3 years touring as a singer-songwriter, just because all those degrees were not enough, before returning home to deepen her spiritual studies. All those experiences, she says, served one purpose: to gain a deeper understanding of herself, humankind, and the universe we inhabit. All of you know I love everything human, and I think Dr. Rosa here is going to walk us through all of that. Rosa, that's such a fascinating blend of worlds. Art, science, and spirit. What originally drew you towards astrophysics? And how did that curiosity evolve into the spiritual path you walk today?
Thank you, Shwetha, so much for having me. I'm really excited to be on Life Vision Lab. When we got in touch with each other, I was really excited to see how in-depth these questions are. I don't always get to go into these deep conversations with everyone, so I'm really looking forward to this experience. A lot of people in this space have a very similar story, which is that I was living that cookie cutter life. I was a rote materialist, and then something major happened in my life, and I woke up, and now I'm spiritual. So that's not what happened to me at all. Even when I was a little child, I was very curious about the unseen world. I had a sense that there was more than meets the eye to all of this. So when I was young, that did make me a little strange, because at recess at school, I would be the kid who runs away from the kickball field to go sit in a grove of trees and talk to the trees. Like, that's who I was at a very young age. And as I got a little older, I was interested in assimilating into society to some degree. So I kind of put a lid on those things. But it was always my curiosity, right? So the reason I ended up being interested in astrophysics, I've always been kind of academic anyway. I've always been deeply curious about how things work or why things are the way they are. And physics does a really good job of giving you tools for answering questions like that. Namely, the language of mathematics is really good at helping us understand how things proceed with time, how things interact with each other. And that was really appealing to me. But I became a physicist because of the big questions I had about reality. So, in a sense, my spiritual leanings or my spiritual curiosity is actually what led me to become a physicist in the first place. In a sense, it wasn't like the spirituality came after, it definitely came before. And I had already had a number of mystical or spiritual experiences myself before I ever studied physics. So I kind of knew what I was getting into. That being said, as I'm sure you're aware, there's a lot of discussion in the spiritual industry about quantum this and quantum that. And at that time in my life, I was like, well, who better to knows what's going on with this quantum stuff? Like the physicist. So I'm just going to go do that. I'm going to go find out
Wow.
what's going on. And I did. But what sort of brought me to where I am today is that as I got through my degrees and got into grad school, I began to come up against the limits of what hard science can find out.
Yeah.
So there's some limits that are there just because the technology doesn't exist yet. Those are
Mhm,
fine.
mhm.
We can still come up with ideas that in principle are testable. But the universe itself does have limits where information can no longer reach us, whether that's because
Mhm.
of time or when photons got released, or, for example, when we talk about black holes and things like that. There are actual physical limits where we cannot detect beyond these boundaries. And
Yes.
at the end of the day, that means that there are some mysteries that we cannot access using the tools of science.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
because you can't measure it and you call it mystical.
Well, that's right. So this is a really interesting point too, which is that there is a school of thought. I would argue that people who aren't part of the scientific endeavor often blame like
Mhm,
all scientists, as though all scientists feel this way. And what I'm talking about is this idea that science says if we can't measure it, it doesn't
mhm,
exist.
mhm,
And I don't think that's what's actually happening. There are people that think that, but it's not everybody. It's not all scientists. But what
mhm,
I can tell you is if we can't measure it through experiment, then it's not science. And that's
mm,
true. That's just true
mhm,
because science
mhm.
requires us to be able to test our ideas. If you can't
Right.
test them using detectors or using experiments, it doesn't mean it's not happening. It just means it's not science. So I just kind of
Mhm,
want to clarify that idea.
mhm.
You
And
know,
that's a good clarification, Rosa, because I think for people like us who are not as close to science, my sister's a scientist, and I know she also has a very curious mind. But if you don't encourage that curiosity to then experiment and then find the results that you think should come out, that's not true science then. You have to test and you have to experiment to see that result.
well, and I think you also have to keep your ego in check too, because when you get
Mm,
results that you don't expect, you need to have the wherewithal to deal with that with
yeah,
integrity. And not
yeah,
even all scientists have that. You know,
yeah.
we like to be proven right. I mean, all of us do,
Yeah,
right? So, in a
yes.
sense, doing science with integrity has actually been its own kind of spiritual or personal development process because to do this the right way, there's a lot
Mm,
of letting go of ego. And there's a lot of grieving enormous amounts of time you spend perhaps working on an idea that turns out to be incorrect. You have to learn to let go so you don't end up, just wholly depressed or something. You have to be able to move
mhm,
on. You also have to
mhm.
be able to have some faith in your ideas when you come up with
Yes.
something and you're not sure if it's right or not, and to be willing to dedicate time and energy to it without knowing what the outcome's going to be. So, in many ways, pursuing some scientific questions requires a leap of faith too. And I guess the point
Mhm,
I'm making is that whatever lines we try to draw between this part of life and that part of life, or between science and spirit, those lines are often arbitrary and they're definitely illusory. Like we make them up, they're not really
mhm,
there. And the story I love
mhm,
telling about this is that, Isaac Newton, the father of classical physics, right? He's very much put on a pedestal. In spite of the person he was, because he's kind of a jerk, he's really put on a pedestal, and we study all the things that he discovered and, calculus and all this kind of stuff. But what is never talked about in the textbooks is that he was also an alchemist, like a serious
mhm,
alchemist. He was a
mhm,
straight up esoteric magician and the father of classical physics. And no one really talks about that because it's like that crazy
mhm.
uncle where you put it under the rug and don't want to talk about it at like a family dinner.
Has too much
Exactly.
don't know how to, I guess, comprehend what's going on.
Right. It's all asking the same questions. I think
Mhm,
for that reason, though, I like to remind people that this division between
mhm,
mysticism and science is modern. division. It was not always
Mm.
this way. In fact, they walked
Mm.
hand in hand together for a long time, like up until the Enlightenment, basically. And that's when they diverged, as Western society, anyway, became way more dependent on a really specific concept around science and experiment and things like that. Actually, around the time Mary Shelley's Frankenstein came out was like that really interesting moment where that split became really obvious. And I love that book because even she is trying to say science without soul is an abomination.
Mm.
That's the
Mm.
thesis right there.
Why do you think that divide became so obvious, Rosa? Like, I'm curious because, as you said, it was always there. And the
Mhm,
fact that some of us are slowly coming back to it, there is a
mhm,
collective sort of calling to acknowledge it now.
mhm.
Why do you think that divide happened? Like, what was the agenda behind it?
Well, okay, things are about to get real, Shweta, okay? In the West,
Okay.
Europe specifically, and this is an opinion, okay? So if there's some historians out there that wanna fight with me, I'm like, "Do it in the comments," you know? Uh, in the West, in Europe, I think it was actually a knee-jerk response against the church. There had
Mm.
been previously in history a lot of incredible ideas that were actually correct about the solar system, for example. You hear about Copernicus getting in trouble with the church and all this kind of stuff, and how because the dominant faith was trying to wrest control around scientific ideas and try to silence scientific ideas. Eventually, people got sick of that. People with enough clout or with enough power or with enough intelligence to do something about it. And what that evolved into culturally was this push back in the other direction, which is saying
Mm.
religion anyway is backwards. These ideas are about control. They're completely
Mm.
ignoring this like evidence-based, like I can prove with my experiment how reality
Mm.
actually works. And it's not the way the church says it is. And so it created this like
Right.
pendulum swing in the other direction to where now these ideas are elevated and these ones are like squashed. You know what I'm saying? So like that's what I think happened anyway, is that it was
Mhm.
actually a response to religious systems of control and suppression. So,
That makes a lot of sense. I'm from a Hindu background and I'm
right.
from India, if you can't guess already. And for me, I think mystical experiences was part of my growing up because of yoga being integrated into my life, meditation being integrated into my life. Maybe not as disciplined as I am today,
Mhm,
but my mother did a very good job of integrating or introducing those things into our lives just to plant that seed to see where it takes us when we
mhm,
grow older. And so I think it was always there, but like, I don't think I was brave enough like you to have that courage then to pursue physics, to then ask all these big questions, which is amazing. So, you often speak about sacred geometry as a common language between science and spirituality.
mhm,
And we see sacred geometry everywhere. I come from a Hindu culture where we call it rangolis, but we draw a lot of these sacred geometry during times of rituals and festivals or every day, to be honest, in many parts of India, first thing in the morning. It's a very mindful exercise where we go in front of our home and we have a certain sacred geometry that's drawn. So, how do you explain the connection to someone grounded purely in science? And honestly, I've had this question all along. What does it mean? Where do you see the overlap between astrophysics and spirituality? Would probably be the next question once you kind of answer that.
mhm. So, I don't think you even need to have a spiritual bent to have an appreciation for the way mathematics describes the way the universe orders itself. And that's a
Mm.
very it's almost personifying the universe to say it orders itself, but what I mean is, let's pretend there's no woo at all, that, like, spirituality is just something that we made up.
Mhm.
I think there's still a lot of awe and wonder accessible to us
Mhm.
just by learning how to describe the way the universe orders itself with
Mhm.
mathematics. I have enjoyed this deep conversation at night with many of my, academic friends by asking the question, "What is math?" Like, what is it actually? Because the reality is that math is like a language that we created. It's a language of relationships, right? So it shows how things are related to one another and how things respond to one another.
Right. When you think
Um,
about addition, subtraction, multi, it's all a way of how you relate, division, separate, right?
mhm,
So that
right.
makes sense. That's
So,
beautifully put.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a descriptive language of relationships. That's how I would describe it. But you dig deeper beyond the language of mathematics into what it is describing. And especially once you dig into abstract mathematics that you use in physics, or for example, there are some types of physical phenomenon that you see in particle physics that are described with mathematics that describes dimensions that we don't physically experience, or describe or uses things that we call irrational numbers or unreal numbers that don't
Mhm.
represent something physical the way that arithmetic does. Arithmetic is very
Mhm.
based in the market. You know, like I sell 5
Mhm.
apples, I make $5. But abstract
Right.
mathematics is not like that. And so when it comes to talking to a materialist about sacred geometry, it might give them a rash that we use the word sacred. But what I think the beauty in it really is in recognizing that the universe exists in such a manner that
Mhm.
this type of organization and this type of repetition of patterning is possible. And it's not just that it's possible, it's that we are able to understand and describe it. So I love the example of crystals as an example of
Mhm.
sacred geometry in the physical world, because the
Mhm.
shape of a crystal is actually a macro expression of its molecular structure. That's why
Mm.
they take the shapes that they do, and that's why different crystals have different shapes that they take, is
Good shapes.
because the molecules that they're comprised of have different ways that they can arrange and different shapes that the molecules are in, and we can see that expression with our eyes in the macroscopic world. If that's not
Mhm.
miraculous, I don't know what is, because we're learning about chemistry and molecular bonds, not with a microscope, but with our eyes, and so the fact that what is happening underneath the surface is emergent in a way that we're capable of understanding, I think is worthy of awe and wonder on its own.
Mm.
You don't actually have to have any kind of spiritual belief system or even believe that consciousness is an actual thing to be able
Mhm.
to appreciate that.
Mm. But what is the whole idea behind rituals and sacred geometry being part of those rituals? Because you see a lot of people talking about drawing a mandala and arranging fire and light around it and flowers and performing rituals a certain way without the sacred geometry is not going to be complete. So, what does that mean?
That's a really interesting question. When I think about ritual in particular, we are not the only species on Earth that engages in ritual, especially animals that have more developed social structure. I
Mhm.
mean, biologists have watched them and discovered that there are rituals around, for example, death and loss that don't look like ours, but they still see these repeating patterns in other species as well.
Mhm.
So the creation of ritual and the reliance on ritual and what it does for us, I think is part of being like a mammal, a social mammal on planet Earth. These are things that create social cohesion and create meaning and also create what I would call initiations or opportunities for
Yeah.
initiation into, for example, different life stages or different levels of consciousness. So
Right.
they provide for us in that way. And, you know, as you mentioned, I studied performing arts too. So I spent a lot of time doing theater and music and the history of those things as well. And in a sense, if you go back far enough, none of this is in recorded history, so this is all
Mhm.
supposition, really. But
Mhm.
one of these working ideas in that area is that theater and music grew out of ritual, that ritual came first, some combination of storytelling
Mhm.
and something that might look like worship but isn't worship as we understand it today, that the performing arts and ritual and spiritual belief all emerged together. in these sort of
Mm.
early practices and early culture building. So, in a sense, if you go back far enough, you cannot separate culture from spirituality, from art, maybe even from language. All of these things are really tied together in their origins. This separation that we see today, I think, is a product of just how many people are in the world. So, like, we learn to specialize so we can make a living for ourselves. But
Right.
fundamentally, and again, this is me studying all these things too, all of this is pointing at the same thing. Art is seeking of the soul. Science
Mhm.
is seeking of understanding reality, understanding what all this is.
Right.
Spirituality is the seeking of the soul and of meaning too. Like everything's pointing at the same thing, which is us
Right.
trying to understand what all this is and what our role is in it. What do we do
Right.
now that we're here?
Right.
What am I? Who am I? Why are we here? What is the meaning of all this? So all of these different pursuits at their core are pursuing the exact same thing.
Mm. And I also think when you say it's probably when there's initiation of some sort, I think it's to bring in the presence and the stillness and the mindfulness to whatever ritual you're getting into, right? And I think the sacred geometry is something that also represents that because in a way it's harmony in the universe, right?
Mhm.
And in its own ways that have beautiful patterns that come out of it.
Yeah, and as you mentioned with mandalas and so forth, many of those are actually representations of a model of the universe or a model of the
Mhm.
soul's journey, for example. So,
Mhm.
like it's still connected in a sense the way mathematics is also trying to describe the universe. It's like these geometries are also trying to do the same thing in another way.
So I'm thinking it's people selling sacred geometry jewelry or people selling sacred geometry pictures and stuff to say it's going
T-shirts.
to bring t-shirts, it's going to bring in a lot of luck and is a just a way of capitalism, right? I think it's just capitalism end of the day trying to make a living for themselves.
Sure. Yeah, well, we are living in late stage capitalism and we got to pay our bills. This is a opinion, big opinion on my part. I think on their own they don't. I think we can imbue them with whatever
Mm.
we need to, which is to say that if you need it to be a good luck charm, it certainly can be. If you need it to be a reminder to stay present, it can be. So in some ways I think it's what you make it. That
Mhm.
we need
Because it's the intention you're bringing to it when you buy it,
That's right,
right?
that's right. So, like, if you need a physical artifact to help you anchor your intention or to
So be it.
keep you centered, I think that's A-okay, but I don't
Mhm.
use the artifact with, like, the real thing, if that makes any
Mhm.
sense. I don't confuse
Mhm.
the artifact with the ideal, I think is a good way to say it.
Yeah. And that makes so much sense. I love how you explained it, Rosa. And I appreciate it because I think it brings out a lot of comprehension into what's happening in today's world because it can tend to get very confusing when you hear the extremes of both and you're helping sort of bridge that really well through our conversation. So where as you can you get a little deeper into where do you see the overlap between astrophysics and spirituality most clearly?
Ooh, that's kind of a juicy question. Where is the overlap most clear? My journey as an astrophysicist taught me many things that I utilize in my spiritual work with myself
Mhm.
and with others. That's definitely true. So, some of these skills, for example, like discernment is a really big one. There's an approach to figuring out what is the right scientific question to pursue. So,
Mhm.
you want it to be kind of important to somebody, right? But
Mhm.
you also don't want it to take 5 years to actually answer your question. So, there's like an
Mhm.
efficiency factor. How quickly can I work on and get an answer to my question, and how important is the question? And you're trying to
Mhm.
optimize that when you
Mhm.
decide what projects you're gonna take on. And I see that in my own work too. So, for example, I'm doing a hypnosis session for someone, and we're together for 3 hours or something like that. There are some things that are too big to take on in one day. Sometimes the work takes a little time, so that might be a better fit for a longer container where we see each other for 2 months or something like that, and it takes time, but there are other things that we can work on right now today. So being able
Mhm.
to optimize that is
Mhm.
really important. Also, the discernment, it comes into just like not losing your common sense as a
Mhm.
kind of in the spiritual industry. There's a lot of fluff out there. There's a lot of word salad out there. And so many
Mhm.
times I see people kind of putting forward, let's say, an offer or something like that. And I'm going through it going like, yes, but what are we actually doing together? Like I'm looking a little deeper for the things. What are we doing? What should I expect? And what are your values? Those are all things that really matter to me and the type of people I work with. And I think the people who work with me feel exactly the same way. But actually having that curiosity, I would, well, I want to call it critical thinking in a way, because you're trying to actually get down to the deepest truth about it. And that's something that I cultivated by being a scientist, because we keep asking those questions as we dig deeper and deeper into a problem, the what, the why, the how. And so we learn how to dig deeper and deeper for a better understanding of what's happening. And I feel like those are things that can be used everywhere in life, not just in your spiritual life, but I think that's where a lot of healing comes from too. If you have some sort of big hang up or block, get curious,
Mhm.
right? Like
Mhm.
ask, well, why? They
I've heard something interesting around what you just covered, Rosa. When we started off our conversation, I said I've always been very curious about physics, one, and about neuroscience, right? Like just anything connected to our brain and just how powerful we are. And we just don't utilize it in for our best abilities. And so what you just covered is when you question, when you're going through a block, it the rewiring starts happening
Mhm.
immediately to then start changing that belief and narrative. The problem is when we stop questioning and we accept it as a reality that that's a limiting belief right there, right? And so I think that's a very important point you mentioned, which people sometimes, and I don't know what it is, I felt stuck for a very long time too. And now I feel the floodgates have opened and the creativity is sort of flowing, but that's because I paused to start questioning every block that came in my mind, and in the end it was just all made up stories, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So what is the work you do with your clients? Can you walk us through it, Rosa? I'm so curious.
Sure. Oh, yeah. It's like I'm still kind of chomping at the bit about your last question. So maybe we can revisit that later.
Yes.
I work with clients in a couple different ways. One of the tools I use, my certification and so forth, is in hypnosis, specifically the tools of transpersonal hypnosis. So it's definitely spiritually focused, and it is designed around the foundational belief that your consciousness has access to information beyond the body. So,
Mm.
in a sense, what's fun about that is that my clients don't need to believe that. The tools still do the job
Mm.
anyway, which I love. But as far as being a practitioner, I mean, I believe it. It's like I've seen too much to doubt the reality of that anymore. As to how it works, we don't know. Nobody knows. And anyone that tells you they know, we have a working model, right? But from a physics type of hard science perspective, we don't have answers about how that could take place yet. I also engage in mentorship, which is sort of a typical type of relationship that is based on setting goals and understanding using the benefit of experience, reframing shifts in perspective. So that's if you've studied mentorship or have trained in mentorship, like those tools are pretty much always the same, whether you're working on career stuff or spiritual issues or
Yeah.
otherwise. But in my hypnosis sessions, the reason I think this is such a powerful tool is because it lets the awake, aware problem solving aspect of your consciousness go chill out and like lay on the beach in Cabo or something and do something else so that we can get underneath the surface. Our
Mhm.
ego's job in many ways is to protect us and to keep us alive.
Mhm.
The problem is it's not
Mhm.
very good at being able to tell if an issue is a survival issue or not.
Mhm.
And so a lot of
Mhm.
people end up blocked in their personal development and their spiritual development, but they're not sure why. They can't see past the block the ego has put there to protect them. So ego's trying to love on you. I don't malign the ego the way some people do because I think it has a very important job in our lives, like in our regular everyday lives.
Mhm,
In a
mhm,
hypnosis session, you're in a safe environment so the ego
mhm,
can go relax and not get in the middle of things, and that allows you
mhm,
to access what's underneath at a deeper
mhm,
level. What are those
mhm,
blocks? What are those traumas? What are the things that are keeping you from moving forward or expanding your capacity? And we can learn about it and bring that information back from that different sort of layer of consciousness, shall we say. And then the client gets an opportunity to integrate because now that they have the information, oftentimes the
mhm,
knowing opens up that whole space and allows them to move on because it's not a mystery anymore. Now that they know what it is, they can do the internal work to work it out or to let it go or to say, this wasn't even my issue. It was my grandmother's. She gave it to my
mhm,
mother, and then my mother gave it to me. So I don't have to carry
mhm,
it and I don't have to
mhm,
make decisions with that. And so at the end of the day, most of what I do ends up becoming, at its core, focused on removing all the programming and narratives and kind of ancestral traumas and burdens and karmic issues too that we kind of carry in and are keeping us from expanding into our full capacity and being able to show up well for ourselves and for each other out in the world and our part, make our soul's contribution. We're trying to get all that stuff out of the way so we can show up and do this together, like, really
mhm,
do it. But because we have a lot of social, cultural, familial stuff to get through first, oftentimes people do need a little support with that. Just because there are
yeah.
things that are really deep or happened really early, so they just don't remember. And that's why I feel hypnosis isn't called for with every client, but it does tend to help almost everyone because there's usually some dusty corner in your psyche that just hasn't been looked at. And if it's stopping you from being able to handle your life or being able to show up fully in your life, then let's work on it. Let's
Mhm,
dust it off. Let's get the broom out, clean it out, and see what's going on so you can deal with it, whatever that looks like. Um, I think there has been a big movement over the last probably almost 20 years now with people using plant medicines to do this work. But I've
yes.
found in my own practice that oftentimes that's like ripping a band-aid off or something. It can be a lot really fast. And so I
Mhm,
also offer support for people going through that kind of thing where it's like they got a major download or like a lot of information came in all at once and they were kind of lost and don't know what to do with all of it. And then we take a longer period of time to try to integrate so that they're just not just like a you know?
and a
So
lot of people here go for the ayahuasca ceremony
mhm,
in Peru and some parts of Mexico as well.
mhm,
And I've been considering one myself, but I think that's what holds me back because I want to make sure that I have the right support when I
mhm,
do go for it and come back, because then they say it's a near death experience and you
yeah,
come back with so much information,
mhm.
right?
But you're educating yourself about it, I'm sure. So when you decide to go, you're not gonna go without a plan, like, not
I
you,
know what
right?
you like. That's good. And so I'm wondering, this is juicy stuff because there's so much I want to unpack in what you just shared. I think you were clear that there's not a lot of data to support how hypnosis works and the data around how you break down through the consciousness of ego and then get really deep. Do you say that we carry karmic baggage? Because a lot of people don't agree with it. A lot of
Mhm.
people think, again, it's all woo woo. So when we talk about breaking generational trauma, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So this is coming from my experience as a
Mhm,
practitioner. Okay. So this is through working with hundreds of people and hearing what is going on at these deeper levels of consciousness because they're talking the whole time. So I've been privy to a lot of unloading around these particular issues. Not everyone is carrying a karmic burden. I don't know if that's a
mhm,
new thing. I've been doing this for almost a decade, but even when I was getting started, I noticed that there were some clients who had really heavy karma that they were working to release and to process and get done. And either they came in look, everyone, this is predicated on the belief that we are reincarnated in some manner. Okay, so buckle up. But some people are coming in without a karmic load. They came for different reasons. Some people come because they love being here. They actually like just what it is to they like being creative in a physical manner. So those people are almost here for fun. Some people came here because they wanted to support humanity during this really wild time that we're going through. A lot of challenges, a lot of difficulties, and they almost came as moral support. And then there are some people who are here because they are not yet free of karmic attachments and baggage that they are working through with other people here with them now. So in the work that I do, we are able sometimes to actually clear karmic attachments in the session as long as the lesson gets learned, because you can't clear it if they don't understand it. But if they can understand what the issue is, what is the thing that's keeping that attachment lingering, understanding it helps them finish the cycle so that it can be closed and then it's done. But, some people just got to do it. They got to work it out. If it's like with their mom or with their child or whatever, however that relationship looks, sometimes y'all are here to do the work and figure it out together. You don't get to skip it. So even if you can clear a karmic attachment, it's because you finally understood it. You embodied the lesson from it. So you didn't skip anything. You just figured it out.
Give me an example of a karmic lesson, just for listeners to simplify it. One. And two, where do you store it? Does it get passed on in your DNA? Like, how does that work?
That's really interesting. So in my practice, I know there are people out there working really specifically on DNA stuff. I don't do that. So in my practice, what I've found is that there's sort of like two categories of karma or karmic issues or attachments. One is interpersonal, so it's between you and another individuated soul, like another person. And the
Yeah.
other kind is that it's part of yourself, which is to say there is, let's call it a distortion in your being. And, you always end up with it for some reason. There's some reason it got there, whether it was a trauma or a bad decision or something like that. Like something happened to you or you made a decision that led to this distortion or misunderstanding about who and what you actually are at your deepest level. And so those are kind of the two categories I've encountered. My take on this, or I'll say my working model, is that I don't really care where or how these things are stored, but to me, it seems like information is held throughout all space and time in a kind of field in a way. And this is because I'm a physicist, right? So it's like I have this idea about fields and how the truth is physically, we are definitely embedded in some kind of physical manifestation of a field that carries information at every single location within the field. That's the fabric of reality. And that's why things like electromagnetism happen, is because this information is embedded in whatever all this is arising out of. And information theory goes one step further to say it's not just like information about charge or mass or something. It's just at its core, what is in this field is information, period. And whatever kind of information it is doesn't really matter. So for me, that actually fits really well with all of this, because as far as consciousness having access to information beyond the physical body or beyond your brain, it's like, well, if the information is just sitting in the field anyway, it's actually just like another sense. Touch, taste, sight, hearing. It's just like we are able to pick up on information the way everything else that physically interacts is. So that's kind of my working model personally. So giving an example of a karmic issue, I'll give you an example that is actually from me. So when I was training, I had to undergo hypnosis myself, like as a client, as part of my training. That's very common. And one of these things that came up in my own sessions was that in a past incarnation, I had a really important job to do supporting a developing culture of people, and that there were kind of rules in place about how much to help, shall we say. People got to be able to figure things out for themselves, or you don't want to give a baby, a blender or something. Like the technology you provide should match their level of development or something like that. So that was the situation. And out of a sense of laziness or shirking my responsibility, I decided to give them a tool that it was really my job to be responsible for. And I just explained it away to myself. Oh, they can manage. They know what they need. This is fine. But karmically, that became a problem for me that had to be addressed in a later incarnation. That desire to shirk my actual responsibility in a way I knew at the time, I knew deep inside, I knew what I was doing, but I did it anyway. And even though this is kind of a little almost silly example in a way, it had real repercussions at that time because of course that culture didn't have the level of development to understand the tool and when to use it responsibly. And that wasn't their fault, it was mine. And that created a karmic issue that then later needed to be resolved. So what that was ultimately about was integrity, which is that on the surface, I didn't do anything bad or directly harmful at all, but it was something internal where I acted not in an integrous way. And even those little inner moments that no one ever hears about or knows about can create a karmic issue because you know the truth.
And that's the noise internally that happens to a lot of us.
Yeah. And so that journey for me was about learning how to really hold fast to integrity, like very seriously. That's not everybody's journey. Of course, I love being with other integrous people because it makes life a lot easier. Everyone says what they mean, right?
Yes.
But for me, the journey wasn't even, it's like I had to deal with these sort of like really dark things in my own journey. But it's at the point where even those little moments inside myself where I'm acting out of integrity point back to that karmic issue. So in a sense, it's like that's in many ways what my current life has ended up being about, is not falling victim to that desire to kind of like take the easy
To show
road.
Christian.
And so I think that's one example. I don't know how common something like that is. Usually it's like you can tell you have karma with your mom because nothing bad ever happened between you, but you still hate each other. Like usually we can trace things like that back to a past life where there's a reason why, like can't get along. But remember that the goal in this life is to figure it out.
Yes.
So
Yeah. And I think you've beautifully explained it, Rosa, at least to expand our mind enough to realize that there is something beyond the current consciousness through hypnosis, right? And you you help capture that through your process of hypnosis, which then helps people to integrate that in their lives and overcome it.
right.
Do you believe consciousness is a fundamental force, perhaps a fabric connecting both worlds?
I wouldn't call it a force as much as I'd call it a property. So I'm being like really persnickety about that. But forces are talking about the way things like influence each other in a way. So when I think about forces, I think about like gravity and electromagnetism and strong force and stuff like that. I'm not sure that's what consciousness is. I think it's more a property the way mass or charge is a property. Do you see what I'm saying? I think it's a property of the fabric of reality or the field or something like that. There's an idea in theory of mind called panpsychism, which is basically this framework that holds that consciousness is in all things. But the degree to which something is consciousness kind of has to do with its level of organization, which is to say small things have small consciousness and big things have big consciousness. But this conversation gets a little funny because you might say, well, microbes have microbe consciousness and humans have big old brains, so we have big brain consciousness. And I'm, well, what about the sun? Is the sun like
Right.
way more conscious than we are? Maybe. I don't know.
And so would you say science is simply just another method then of observing that divine order?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Oh, totally, and I don't know that scientists realize that's what they're doing all the time.
Mhm.
Absolutely, yes, because we're not just observing, we are trying to understand it. We are trying to find
Mhm.
ways to describe it and make predictions about it. It's a desire not just to bear witness to it,
Mhm.
but to feel like we actually get it. And I think the one piece that's missing from this, and the reason why there's this schism in some ways, is that I think some people felt like being able to explain it or describe it or predict it would help us find meaning, and that turned out to not be true. It gives us a
Mhm.
degree of understanding, but meaning and purpose will never come from the scientific endeavor. Meaning and purpose come from spirituality and philosophy and those endeavors. And so if I was to give one message about bridging these two to anyone, it would be not to discount either one. Don't discount science because it puts things in a box. It's really endeavoring to understand how all of this works, how it works. But
Mhm.
scientists and skeptics don't put mysticism and spirituality in the trash can either, because it's also
Mhm.
endeavoring to understand not how, but why. Why any of
Mhm.
this? Why us? Why life? How did life even
Mhm.
happen? Is it an emergent phenomena that happens all the time? Is it a precious jewel that just showed up on this blue rock in the middle of the suburbs of the Milky Way? We don't actually know yet.
Yeah. 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 And I think that's what, so my next question was going to be that. And I think you answered it. Like, how do you reconcile your analytical mind with your intuitive gifts? Because, like you said, science is equally as important as the mystical and the spiritual side. But when you began, or before you began this journey of your own exploring your spiritual gifts, how did you reconcile with your analytical mind that you're not going to have answers to everything? Just like you said about hypnosis, right? There's a working theory, but there isn't hard evidence of how some of this actually comes about.
Mhm. Well, for me, being a scientist was very humbling
Mm-hmm.
because although some people talk a big game, a good scientist knows that all we have is sort of the best working model, and that those models change all the time as new discoveries are made and new evidence appears and better tools are developed. Our ideas shift with time. Did you know that in 1910, people were saying that physics was complete, that it was done? And guess what? Quantum mechanics and relativity had not even come out yet. They had not been discovered or even thought about. So
Right.
anytime we have the hubris to think we're nearing the finish line, I promise we're on the verge of a breakthrough. That to me is humbling though, because it means that there is always something to discover. So in a sense, there's actually not much to reconcile. Being a good scientist means understanding there's enormous mystery still to delve into, and knowing there are limitations to what we can ever learn through detectors and through experiment. If that's not humbling, check yourself, you know?
And
So
that's
when it
powerful to realize too, right? That intelligence expands when heart and mind sort of collaborate.
Mhm, mhm.
And you know that you're just on this quest of learning more and more.
That's right, but that's true spiritually too. So for me,
Mhm.
I don't have a concrete model for what I think is going on with souls and consciousness and all of those things. I have working models just like with everything, just like with science, right? I have
Mhm.
ideas that work well within the frameworks that I apply in my client work. But I'm always open to learning something new. I'm always open to being proven wrong. And so that has been the journey for me where both of these things are actually they're not different for me. That's what I mean is for me there's been nothing to reconcile. I have been deep into esoteric and mystical studies since I was 7. So that's always been a part of me. And this analytical mind I've always been good at math. I've always been interested in science. It's both always been true. So in a sense, it's like I'm not reconciling it within myself. I'm here to help y'all reconcile it.
Mhm.
That's kind of how I would describe it.
I love that. And I think that's why you said your very first hypnosis session was so transformative too, right? Because it
Mhm.
changed the course of your career. And
Yes.
I'm going to quote you on what I read on your website. That single session convinced you that this kind of internal work and healing should be available to as many people as possible.
Yes.
You began holding space for others in your late 20s, first for friends who sought guidance, and by 2017, you'd opened your professional practice helping clients reconnect their inner wisdom. Until, as you say, the need for guidance fades and they become their own healer.
Mhm.
Boom. And I love that. I love that, Rosa, because that's my intention too through this podcast. Understand tools available, but use those tools to then finally trust yourself to go
Yes.
within and seek guidance.
100%. Yes.
So, for listeners new to QHHT, can you explain what happens during a session? You kind of did a little bit, but can you get a
Mhm.
little deep?
Okay. So QHHT is a specific modality called quantum healing hypnosis technique.
Mhm.
And the shortest way I can describe, because these sessions are long, they take pretty much all day. You're not under
Oh, wow.
hypnosis all day, but we're together all day. So
Mhm.
essentially, through this process, what happens is that I assist my clients in shifting their consciousness such that they become a channel for their own higher self or the collective aspect of their consciousness, and then report on what's going on, can share information. All of it's recorded for them to listen to when they're not under hypnosis. But that's really the goal, is that we are accessing information and healing and working on whatever. Some people come with issues, some people come with goals, but whatever it is they're bringing to the table to work on, we work on those things in this altered state. And I'm there to help them navigate and help them report back. And that reporting
Mhm.
back on the recording is really important because once they are no longer under hypnosis, oftentimes, even if they were somewhat aware during the session, you'll forget it in like an hour or 2 anyway, because it's long. You don't remember everything that happens in a 2-hour movie either. What I'm trying to say is that they need to go back and listen to the recording when they're in their awake, aware, problem-solving state of mind, and that's where the real magic happens because they get to hear with their own voice what their collective aspect had to say.
Even when I listen to a podcast, for example, and sometimes I revisit certain podcasts, and each time I listen, there's a different message I get. So,
Mhm.
recording those sessions, as you said, because there's such a huge download of information that it's hard for us, for the conscious brain to sort of comprehend everything. So, you can keep going back
Yes.
and getting some really good nuggets, right?
Recommendation is for the client to listen to the whole thing at least twice, like 2 times
Mhm.
minimum all the way through. Yeah.
Amazing. And so, from a scientific perspective, what's going on in the brain and the energy field, you think?
That's an interesting question too. In a sense, I think neuroscience probably has the better answers for what's happening during hypnosis, but it's best described by using coherence and brain waves. Essentially, we are shifting the brain in through different coherent states to one that is very similar to sleep. The theta brainwave state is the most common coherent state in hypnosis, but you can actually reach the gamma brainwave state also, which is more highly energized and actually tends to be better for this kind of channeled experience where
Mhm.
you're bringing in this kind of guidance from a more collective level. Theta brainwave state tends to be associated with more like the subconscious or repressed memory and things like that. And gamma actually tends to open things up and gather access to like a wider range of information.
Mhm. I'm so excited now with this next question. Can you share a story that still gives you chills?
Oh my gosh. I just thought of something right away. I had a client, this was still pretty early on in my practice, when I was starting, I didn't understand how powerful the connection between the mind and the body. So I knew
Mhm.
this method had a lot of power almost from a psychological or therapeutic standpoint. But I
Mhm.
had a client who was scheduled to have hip surgery. He had a hip
Mhm.
problem, and he
Mhm.
also had a large cyst that had been on his chest for an extensive period of time. It had been there for probably at least a year. And again, he really had the choice of like get it surgically removed or just leave it there. And
Mhm.
in our session, he did ask if we could try to work on those things.
Mhm.
And I was like, "Sure, we can try." So in his session, once he had passed through his sort of theta stage in the session and we got him into the gamma, it became really obvious because the temperature in the room changed. And you
Mhm.
will also notice if you're ever in one of these sessions that the way communication happens when clients are in the gamma state tends to be very consistent, like between every
Mhm.
client. And that has been
Mhm.
one of the really interesting and maybe a little spooky things was after I'd worked with enough people to realize that whatever I'm speaking to during that stage of the session is something that was getting to know me and developing patterns in how it would communicate with me through different people. So,
Wow.
having witnessed that firsthand was when I really began to understand that we're in touch with something that is maybe has more reality to it than I had thought. I'll just say that. But in that session, this collective consciousness or collective aspect said that it was willing to work on these physical issues with this client. And I said, okay, well, what will you do? Just asking questions like, how do you do that? What are you doing? And essentially, it described in immense detail the anatomy of that part of the body and what it was doing with the immune system, with specific types of cells in the body, and gave a really vivid description around these things. And I'm just, okay, cool. I didn't know yet. So I'm going through the session. Everything seemed hunky dory. This individual had been walking with a cane. At the end of the session, the sort of last takeaway message before we came back out gave a little prognosis and said to the client, expect this, expect this, expect this about his healing and so forth. And I got an email from him maybe 3 or 4 days later that he had not needed the cane at all to walk around. His pain in the hip was gone. The night after our session, so this is the same day, the night after our session, the cyst opened up in the shower and completely emptied out of his body that evening. And he ended up
Mhm.
foregoing the hip surgery altogether. So it never happened. The surgery never happened. And, I'm still in touch with this person, which is kind of cool, even though we don't live near each other anymore. But things like that really challenged me. Because again, I think even though I personally have always had an interest in the unseen world. I haven't personally seen a ghost or something like that. I'm a pretty meat and potatoes person in the way that I live and what I experience. These things challenge my beliefs. They challenge my capacity to hold mystery. Because again, as a scientific type of person, I want to know how.
Mhm.
And the best that I can see is what the medical field calls the placebo effect. But I think there's a misunderstanding of what the placebo effect is. It's not you convincing yourself you don't hurt, it's actually the body healing. It's
Feeling.
the body
Mhm.
healing. And the question is,
Mhm.
what is this connection between the mind and the body? What is this connection between belief and the body to where the body's own systems are like, oh no, we do know how to fix this problem. Oh no, we do know
Mhm.
how to rebuild this tissue. Oh no, we do know how to open this infection and clear it. And it's like, well, why wasn't doing it before? So I have a lot of questions, but this was what I was saying before is that I don't know how it works, but I have seen it work dozens and dozens of times And as a scientist who likes to have answers and likes to be able to describe things with math and stuff like that, I can't do it with this work, and yet I do it anyway. So, in some sense, by being a practitioner and being a facilitator of this method, I have had to learn how to sit comfortably with mystery and to
Mm.
say yes anyway.
Hmm. Let's just sit with that for a second. That's beautiful and give me chills too. Thank you, Rosa, for sharing that. I want to just shift gear now into the last part of our episode. We spoke a little bit, we touched upon sacred geometry, but I want to go a little deeper on that. If we are micro universes, right, within ourselves, how does sacred geometry appear within our bodies and emotions? Like, do emotions have frequency? Can love or coherence be measured like light? Like, what's your take on it?
There are some researchers actually trying to experiment with this using
Mm.
detectors that are essentially multispectral, right? So it's trying to look at what people's bodies are emitting in the infrared, invisible light, in UV, and literally detecting the photons being emitted by our bodies. So as a baseline, we're emitting infrared all the time. That's just heat. Our bodies, we're like little batteries emitting heat anyway. And
Mhm.
what these researchers are trying to discover is how the light our bodies emit anyway is impacted by, for example, the state of consciousness that we're in, or the emotion that we're feeling, or if there's pain or disease in the body. And they're trying to
Mhm.
understand that. I don't think any of that has been accepted by mainstream science at this point.
Mhm.
When we talk about things having a frequency, I am very happy to this is regular old workaday physics. This isn't woo physics. That
Mhm.
physical systems, any physical object or particle has a characteristic frequency that can be described with mathematics. That's not woo. That's regular. No one's going to fight with you about that. So in a sense, it's that frequency correlates to how much energy is held in order to make matter. Because as we all know, matter and energy are actually fundamentally the same, but it's matter's a little energy packet that's held
Mhm.
together. So a more
Mhm.
massive thing just is more energy grouped together. When it comes to emotion and stuff like that, I actually think more about chemistry.
Mhm.
Because in a sense, our experience of our emotions has a lot to do uh with our hormones and with our neurons, like not just the neurons in our brain, but the neurons in the other parts of our bodies too. In fact, when yogis talk about the body's wisdom or being able to trust your gut, there's a whole huge set of neurons in this part of your body that's not even in your brain that is managing a lot of your functions and stuff all the time.
Mhm.
So the impulses you get from those neurons, again, you should not elevate one over the other. Like they both carry wisdom, right? Um, but yeah, so when I think about emotions, I think emotions are more like a biochemical type of reaction that's carrying information. So I don't personally think about those as a level of frequency. It's more like it's alert system or something, hormonal and biochemical alert system that's telling me something. It's
Mhm. But you
information.
can control the emotions, though.
I think that we can regulate ourselves for sure, but something by regulate, I don't mean not feel your feelings though. So here's an
Mhm.
example. I am very sensitive to my husband's emotions. And when we
Mhm.
first got together, I didn't really understand that enough to
But
so it's like if he was having a bad day and I felt really bad, I didn't know that it was his emotions I was feeling. Now I know. So in a sense, it's like I can walk into a room where he is and I know how he's feeling right away because I physically feel it. Like when I say physical, it's the emotion. I feel the emotion in my body happening takes a split second and I'm like, "Oh, he's feeling that way. I'm
Mhm.
fine, but I'm
Mirroring
experiencing
is
his emotion, literally.
right.
And
Mhm.
even if I'm very regulated, that doesn't mean I'm not feeling the feeling. So, in a sense,
Mhm.
my regulation is more my capacity to be a witness to whatever's happening in the body.
Mhm.
And in a sense, it's like the emotion is a thing that's happening to the body. So even when I'm having my own feelings and I know that it's mine, I have built over time the capacity to sit with that too. So I can be in a
Mm.
pretty tough place and
Mhm.
still just sit with that and sit with myself. I'm still crying. I still got a huge box of tissues,
But
but
there's a
I'm also
level of acceptance that you've
right.
reached.
Right.
Right.
Acceptance and also not resistance either. Like
Mhm.
sometimes you have a Zoom call, right? So it's like you can't do it right now, but it's like I'll put a pin in it and I'll come back to this. But generally speaking, I am not resisting my emotions or being in denial of them at all. In fact, I'm embracing that experience because that embrace and that capacity, instead of being like a sponge that absorbs all the emotions and all of that stuff, whether it's mine or someone else's, I'm like a mesh net and the emotions are water that can flow through the net. And then I know where my work lies because sometimes something gets caught in the net and I'm like, oh, it's like a boot. Sometimes stuff gets kind of stuck on you, but then it's easier for me to see what it is because everything else is flowing through. And I'm like, oh, I found a trigger. And
Mhm.
so it's a process of discovery. Again, it's led by curiosity instead of being led by denial or panic or like, I'm afraid to
Or
have a hard
resistant.
feeling. Yeah, I don't
Right.
have any of that. I
Mhm.
accept that difficulties or challenges or sadness or grief or whatever it is, all those things are part of the human experience. So I do not reject it. I think
Mhm.
embrace and acceptance are some of the most transformational initiations you can pass through because everything's different on the other side when you're not trying to push away these things in
But
your
as a
life.
society, we've always struggled with big emotions, right? So the more we talk about it, the more accepting it becomes. So thank you for talking about it. And so we're coming to the close of the episode. Although I can speak to you for hours, Rosa, I just enjoyed this conversation. If there's one universal law you wish everyone embodied daily, what would that be?
Universal law, it's all
Hmm.
energy.
Hmm.
It's all energy.
Hmm. And how can listeners begin merging the scientific and the sacred in everyday life?
I think you can do that by leaning into that one universal law. If it is all energy, what does that mean? What does that mean about what you're experiencing? What does that mean about reality? What does that mean about who and what you are? So if you get your curiosity and start to dive into that, I think there's a lot to discover. Keep asking hard questions.
Amazing. And so maybe the universe doesn't speak in equations or prayers, maybe it speaks in energy. Thank you, Rosa, for helping us hear that language a little more clearly. And if you've loved this conversation, share it with someone who's walking their awakening journey. Follow Life Vision Lab on Instagram and YouTube for more reflections that help you align your outer success with your own inner clarity. I'd love for you to comment, share, or message me to let me know how and what touched your heart from this conversation. It helps me understand what's landing, what you're integrating, and how we can grow together, mind, body, and soul. Until next time, stay aligned, stay curious, and keep listening to the whispers of the universe. And if you want to get in touch with Dr. Rosa, her details are in the description box below. Thank you.
Thank you, Shweta.